I think I've reached the point where I just want to lobotomize these people. Hi, my name is Sydney, welcome back to hell. And as per usual, before we launch in, today's video is sponsored by Incogni. And you guys know the drill, it's also sponsored by me and my tea company, Lions Tea Exchange. And in some very exciting news, I have finally added 3 incredibly delicious new fall/Christmas flavors to the website for pre-sale: bourbon barrel chai, apple cider rooibos, and peppermint white chocolate. All of which are like genuinely incredibly good. I've also added these lovely wooden gift boxes to the website as well as we head into the gift giving season. These are also available for pre-sale, and the cool thing is that you can use them to store your tea if you so desire, or I have put them together and designed them so that these dividers that are in here are actually removable, so you can use the box for whatever you so desire. Real talk, these gift boxes are made here in the United States, and the company that I work with plants a tree for every order placed, which honestly I think is really cool. But that aside, they're nice and heavy, they feel good, they smell good, they look good, and I think they're gonna make a pretty bomb gift. So go check it all out. I will link everything in the description box. Now, a few weeks ago, I made a video discussing the new Star Wars offering, the Acolyte, and the girl bosses behind the scenes at the franchise. And then, much to nobody's surprise at all, the Acolyte was cancelled, and people had a lot of big feelings about that. I saw a lot of incels getting blamed. Or something.
So the Acolyte was cancelled.
It's definitely because incels didn't like 2 people of color holding hands. We're not gonna forget that.
They've hit the second tower.
I don't care about what the incel said.
I understand that it got review bombed to an insane degree by so many people who were hating on it just because of what seemed like internal prejudice.
But because these situations are almost always the gift that keeps on giving, Amandla Stenberg, the non-binary queer leading actress of the show, recently posted an 8-minute video on Instagram weighing in on everything thus far. In the video, Stenberg said that the Acolyte being cancelled wasn't really that big of a surprise due to the, quote, rampage of hyper-conservative bigotry and vitriol, prejudiced hatred, and hateful language. God, this way of talking sounds just like the people that I went to university with. It's giving me a little bit of PTSD, I'm not gonna lie. Stenberg goes on to say that all of this was very impactful, leading the actress to become very vocal within the context of working for Disney and on Star Wars. Stenberg spends most of the video thanking fans and other people who worked on the show, and ends the video telling people repeatedly to vote. Because every opportunity is an opportunity for politics, according to these people. That's probably why your show got cancelled there, little lady. Early on, Stenberg made a rap of some description, basically calling out people who dislike the show, labeling them racist and bigoted and whatnot. Which I would honestly show you, but somehow Amandla Stenberg has managed to get this video into the YouTube copyright system so that if you do use it, you get copyrighted. And you guys know very well how I feel about fighting the YouTube copyright system. I hate it! With all of this said, considering Stenberg's previous comments about this franchise and the audience and the show itself, in conjunction with these new comments, it got me thinking about just how little these actors and actresses actually understand the original meaning and objectives and mission of Star Wars. And how somehow this misunderstanding, deliberate or otherwise, has basically reached every corner of Lucasfilm as it exists today. At the top, with Kathleen Kennedy, trickling down to its various actors and actresses. The original creator of Star Wars, George Lucas, regardless if you like or dislike him, knew exactly what Star Wars was, and he's been very vocal over the years about what it is and isn't. He knew precisely the story that he was trying to tell and executed that on a global stage. But instead of upholding his vision, as I've said previously, a greater emphasis has been placed on replacing it with female-led stories and greater diversity in casting, more or less to the detriment of Star Wars itself. sadly. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The age of insufferable actresses and actors who don't seem to understand at all the franchise that they're working on and Star Wars' original vision. And of course, all of my regular disclaimers, this video is by no means exhaustive, although it has ended up a lot longer than I was originally anticipating, and I still don't feel like I said all the things that I wanted to say. So, you know, there's that. Take all of this and then don't scream at me in the comments. So with that said, and before you once again board my hell gondola and together we traverse this river of weirdness and a lot of the time disappointment, let's hear from today's sponsor, Incogni. Have you ever gotten one of those text messages from a Nigerian prince telling you that your package is still at the post office? Spoiler alert, there is no package. And that text is not from the post office. And there's no Nigerian prince. It's a spam text, and it's probably because your private information is accessible somewhere online. Unfortunately, data brokers collect and sell personal information, including your full name, home addresses, emails, phone numbers, social security number, all sorts of things. This can lead to spam, identity theft, and even real-life harassment. And if you're anything like me and this genuinely freaks you out, well, the good news is there's a way to tackle it, thanks to Incogni. Incogni reaches out to data brokers on your behalf and requests the removal of your personal data from these sites. They will also deal with any objections and monitor your information to make sure it doesn't pop up on the same site or anywhere else. The process is very simple. You make your account, give Incogni the right to act on your behalf, and then sit back and let them work their magic. Incogni offers an individual plan, but also has one for friends and family, meaning that you can add up to 4 loved ones to your subscription and help keep them safe from data brokers. And best of all, Incogni is also available risk-free for 30 days, meaning if you don't love it, you can get a full refund. So if you would like to take action and remove your personal information from the internet, then click the link in the description or go to incogni.com/Sydney. And don't forget to use code Sydney for 60% off an annual plan. In 2015, 3 years after Disney had purchased the rights to Star Wars, George Lucas sat down to interview with American journalist Charlie Rose. During their discussion, Lucas seemed particularly unhappy about the direction of the franchise, mirthlessly laughing and trailing off as he referred to Disney as the white slavers to whom he sold his films, who he described as his children.
These are my kids. So
all those Star Wars films.
All the Star Wars films.
They were your kids.
Yeah, well, they are. I loved them. I created them. I'm very intimately involved in them, and obviously to
and
sell
you
them
sold
off.
them.
I sold them to the white slavers that take these things and.
Okay, but having said all that.
Since then, this interview has struck a lot of people as particularly sad. Lucas admitted that him aging was a motivator for selling his company and his films, and despite having to make this hard choice, he seemed unhappy that it was one that he had to make in the first place. Lucas didn't hold back in criticizing the film industry for propping up profit over storytelling, a criticism he has routinely repeated in one way or another since the 1970s. In fact, in a documentary from 1983, Lucas took aim at the overemphasis on special effects in films. He said, "Special effects are just a tool, a means of telling a story. People tend to confuse them as the ends themselves. A special effect without a story is a pretty boring thing." Back in the 2015 discussion with Charlie Rose, Lucas doubled down on these views, and despite leaving them a catalog of material, Disney was not interested in Lucas's involvement, effectively pushing him out of the picture. That's probably because they're IP vampires. They suck the blood out of other people's creations. Although Lucas walked back these comments a few days later, it's very evident based on his many interviews since that these were a reflection of his true feelings. And although I'm probably reading between the lines here, he seems to almost regret his decision to hand the reins over to all of these other people. Mostly Kathleen Kennedy. We see you, Kathleen Kennedy! But one of the most interesting things here is how frequently everyone orbiting Star Wars, from Kathleen Kennedy to writers to showrunners to the actors and actresses themselves, routinely refer back to George Lucas, acting as though they're carrying out his will with the new Star Wars iterations. Interestingly still, it seems that George Lucas doesn't share in that sentiment.
There isn't a day that goes by or went by as we were making the movie where we don't talk about George. You know, it's the standard, what would George do?
Of course, we'll never really know for sure, but I'm willing to bet that the modern iterations of Star Wars are everything that Lucas actively despises. Hyper-commercialization, a preference for appearance and special effects over a good, meaningful story and writing, and a cast of showrunners and actors who undermine his vision. Not to mention, they accuse his original stories, which, to remind you all, he refers to as his children, as anti-female and anti-diversity. Well, I suppose you get what you get when you let Kathleen Kennedy near your kids. Since his white slavers comment, Lucas hasn't been quite as vocal in his criticism of Disney. That is, up until recently. During a discussion at the 2024 Cannes Film Festival, Lucas made a comment that, similarly to when they were filming The Empire Strikes Back, he was the only one that really knew Star Wars, and nobody understood the Force.
Even though, like with Empire Strikes Back and some, I ended up having to be on the set the whole time, but it's like, I was the only one that really knew what Star Wars was, and so I was like the consultant, the advisor who actually knew the world, because there's a lot to it. The Force, nobody understood the Force. Nobody, you know, what they do is, and then they started other ones when I sold the company, and they, you know, a lot of those ideas that were in there sort of got lost.
He added that after Disney started making its films after he sold the company, a lot of the ideas that already existed in the original Star Wars got lost. Something that's worth remembering is that Lucas is one of the biggest individual shareholders in Disney, so when he's lobbing criticism, surely something serious is going on. And if he's comfortable saying that today most of his original ideas have been lost, that has to mean something. As others have rightly pointed out, Lucas's original films were inspired by all sorts of things. His views on authoritarianism, his interest in exploring familial relationships, his interest in different cinema, and cool scenes from other films. Today, Star Wars is simply inspired by past Star Wars, but not in a way that's inventive and creative, in a way that seeks to alter the perceived failures of Lucas's original creations. Clearly too many Ewoks. Not enough women. Not even enough women Ewoks. Which is why we've ended up with a series of people involved in these projects who don't understand anything about what underpins Star Wars and its universe and its stories. One of the areas where this is most clear is when it comes to women and diversity. I already talked at length about Kathleen Kennedy and her quest for femaleness in the video that I made about this exact topic a couple weeks ago, which I will link in the description. So I'm going to try to not rehash what I have mostly already hashed. I feel like I'm already doing enough talking as it is. But to Cliff Notes it, for those of you who haven't watched that video, Kathleen Kennedy has made it clear that one of her primary objectives is to expand the number of women in senior positions at Lucasfilm, as well as place a strong emphasis on creating more female-centric stories. This is a position, of course, shared by other people, particularly women, at the company, some of whom are writers and directors themselves. And all of this is largely based on the view that Star Wars has always been a boys' club, one that conveys a strong anti-female sentiment. The sad thing is that this idea has apparently been drilled into everyone who works on the franchise today, with oddly a chorus of actors, actresses, showrunners, and directors suggesting that Star Wars just isn't that female-orientated.
So my character, you know, she's a powerful leader. She's a powerful leader. Yes. In a very woman-centered world, which I was very excited to kind of be in that, because I feel like Star Wars is very like patriarchal, so it was kind of cool to have like this sort of woman-centered figure.
I feel that our show was much more woman-centered than what I have previously seen in the Star Wars world, just from the fact that, you know, our showrunner, our amazing, incredible showrunner, Leslie is a genius woman, and female producers, and having Amandla be the person who's leading our cast. It was like a very cool, I thought, way into this universe in a way that I feel that people have never necessarily seen before.
Even when The Force Awakens hit cinemas, the cast made a huge deal about how many women had participated in the film.
And I'm so excited that, guys, the girls in this movie kick some butt. Every single one is so good, and I can't wait for everyone to see it.
And despite even trying to suggest that these women were well-written characters, some of them ended up being the most unlikable of all. And also, let's not forget that in other interviews and other conversations, J.J. Abrams and his team of freaks admitted that Rey was basically a Mary Sue, that she was always going to be good at everything. So, there's that.
And I think what's great about everyone is it's not like she's a girl, this is a guy, this is anything. It's just great characters that happily are falling into broader categories now.
I just want to pay tribute to Ryan for being one of the most brilliantly subversive filmmakers I've ever been able to bear witness to. And in the case of the look of my character, I was moved by the fact that he really wanted her strength to first lead with a very deep femininity.
This is so weird to listen to because I make no secret of the fact that I don't like Rey. At all. And I know the rest of you don't particularly like purple-haired bull-gown lady. Personally, I have no opinion of her, but I do want to know why she's basically wearing a bull gown on a ship. Is this the femininity that's being referenced here? Is this what she means? Grim. Even The Force Awakens writer and director, J.J. Abrams, made comments during an interview on Good Morning America that he hoped to transform the space opera from a boys' thing to a female-friendly franchise that mothers could take their daughters to see. If it makes you guys feel even a little bit better, yes, he got roasted for this. I love me some backfired pandering in the morning. Well, there is an extremely clear desire to have more women in Star Wars stories. The belief that underpins that desire is not really based in reality. In the earlier Star Wars films, it's true that there were far fewer females compared to their male counterparts, but creating iconic, strong female characters has always been one of the original film's strengths. And unlike the people participating in Star Wars today, George Lucas and his early cast members understood this themselves. When asked about selecting Carrie Fisher to play Princess Leia, George Lucas explained that he wanted someone who could hold her own against strong characters and strong actors, while being the princess and authority figure that she needed to be. This view was similarly reflected by Fisher herself, who explained that George Lucas didn't want Leia to be a damsel, and that is something that drew her to the role.
Well, what appealed to me was that George Lucas, who wrote it and also directed it, didn't want a damsel in distress, didn't want your stereotypical princess, sort of a victim, frightened, incapable of dealing with the situation without the guys. So he wanted a fighter. He wanted someone who was independent. And that's what appealed to me about that part, yeah.
Why am I just now noticing that Carrie Fisher is a total fox? Why was this kept from me? Who was gatekeeping this information? In further interviews, Fisher also expressed admiration for her character, saying that Leia was a kind of badass and fearless in a way that Fisher wished she could be in real life, something that a lot of young women likely found inspirational, which frankly, honestly, just from my, weirdo vantage point, is just such a nice observation and so radically far from what we're usually exposed to today.
She's just authoritative and just plows ahead. It doesn't matter. Let's go through this shower of asteroids. Who cares? And my hair won't get messed up. So she's different from... I like her. I like her independence, and I do wish that I had a little bit more of... Come on, let's just walk through the traffic. It doesn't bother me. It's not a... I won't get hurt. There's a sequel. So... on that level, I envy her. I admit it.
Even as the films progressed and Natalie Portman's Padmé/Princess Amidala was added to the mix, Portman understood her character to be a positive representation of feminism, in a way where her character wasn't trying to be like the men, wasn't trying to compete with them, and certainly wasn't trying to put them down, but trying to be strong in the face of her role as a woman and as a leader.
I think the true feminism is bringing what is particular to women, because we are different, that's undeniable, to the opportunities that men have. So it's not, going into some place and just behaving like a man or necessarily desiring what men want just because you can get it. And so rather than being consumed with the thirst for power, as many of the people around her do, both men and women, she stays true to her compassion and her belief in democracy and humanity.
If I'm allowed to get just a little bit warm and fuzzy for a moment here, one of the things that I actually really like and appreciate is how George Lucas describes his female characters with this level of admiration and adoration. I think it's really nice. Even though we are still here on the Hell Gondola, it makes me feel squishy inside. Well, that's my feeling done for the day. On a serious note, in his own words, George Lucas describes his female characters as the heroes of the story.
Later on, when they were making more movies, they said, there's no women in the movies. I said, who do you think the heroes are in those films? What do you think Princess Leia was? She is the head of the rebellion. She's the one that's taking this young kid that doesn't know anything and this boisterous, I know everything guy who can't do anything and trying to save the rebellion with these clowns. I said, she's the hero of the movie. And it's the same thing with Queen Amidala. Even though she has Jedi on her side, she was still the hero prime mover. And they said, well, but there's no women, I said, you can't just put a woman in pants and expect her to be a hero.
Hearing all of this, what is genuinely so sad to me about the current state of Star Wars is that it really seems like a lot of the actors and actresses and showrunners and writers and blah-de-blah don't really know even at all who Princess Leia and Princess Amidala actually were. Like, again, considering the time, like with Princess Leia, what these women were actually representing. In 1977, when A New Hope hit theaters, women were marching for equality and had very few on-screen badass ladies to admire. And then Princess Leia came along with her snappy comments and fearless attitude. So even when the men, Han and Luke, showed up to rescue their damsel, she looked at Luke and sarcastically said, "Aren't you a little short to be a stormtrooper?" And then, just took over their escape mission. Even one of the most highly criticized moments in Star Wars history, where Leia is rocking her golden bikini, even at her most vulnerable, she turns around and strangles to death a giant space slug. Man, I love Leia. The point is, unlike today's ensemble of Star Wars figures, and obviously this doesn't apply to all of them, but to a portion, George Lucas actually understood who his female characters were, what drove them, what their ambitions were, their failings, and so on and so forth. And it really seems like he wasn't just writing female characters for the sake of female characters. And at this point, as most of you likely already know, this is the opposite of what our friends over at corporate feminist Hollywood do with their female characters, where they push and shove for them whether it makes sense or not. And I know I've said this previously, but I will say it again. This is not me suggesting that every single Star Wars character is a travesty, and not every single Star Wars female character is a travesty. That's obviously not the case. But their inclusion always makes me wonder if they're there for the sake of it, or if they're actually necessary and needed in the story. This very same question can be asked when it comes to this obsession with diversity and inclusion and representation. One of the primary criticisms being thrown at the early franchise films is that they simply had too many white men. Later films, like The Force Awakens, started making an attempt to right this wrong by casting more Asian and Black actors, such as Kelly Marie Tran as Rose Rico. The Acolyte went a step further, including a very diverse cast of actors and actresses, and even inserting some LGBTQ HDTV representation along the way. I'm sure you all remember this famous scene.
Who's that? This puzzle. Is he or they with us?
And let's not forget about the lesbian space witch coven. Let's also remember this gem.
I think it's canon that R2-D2 is a lesbian.
In discussing The Acolyte, Kathleen Kennedy herself noted that storytelling needs to reflect the diversity of the real world and be representative of all people. What? And the cast of The Acolyte have been very good at parroting these talking points. In one interview, for example, with Entertainment Weekly, most of the cast discusses their excitement for the diversity of the show.
Yeah, I feel like we are part of a wave of more inclusive and more beautifully represented Star Wars shows.
If this woman looks even a little bit familiar to you, let me refresh your memory. Her name is Jodie Turner-Smith, and she played none other than Anne Boleyn. This Anne Boleyn. Historically relevant, existed in real life, white lady decapitated Anne Boleyn. Guess she got a little bit too much sun one summer. Whoever did that honestly just needs to be removed. Charlie Barnett, who plays Yord Fandar, what a terrific name, also commented that seeing a diverse group of actors and actresses in The Acolyte is going to be a good thing. This was obviously before everyone saw it and disliked it, so you know, there's that.
Because I was not reflected for so many times throughout these films in the past, but it was just also something that it didn't equate in my mind. I don't know about for you guys as well. So to see such a diverse group played out now,
honestly,
I know that it's going to be a healthy reflection on so many other young people and old people. I mean, no ageism allowed in this. It's Star Wars. We can all fit.
I think it's fun to think that like all the like kids out there who will see themselves like reflected in us, which is something that
for the first time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
At one point, Daphne Keane discusses how their fighting training is based on samurai and Asian martial arts. Which I'm not super sure what point this is trying to make here, given that, like, even in the early days of Star Wars, like, since the beginning, martial arts has been used as one of the primary influences, so... Like, congratulations for doing a thing that was already being done, I guess. Undoubtedly, one of my favorite clips from this interview is Amandla Stenberg saying that, historically, black nerds weren't safe in sci-fi. Okay. And that Stenberg is also happy to be part of this change in Star Wars.
So to be in any way, shape, or form a part of the wave that is ushering in inclusion and safety for black nerds. it's like, it's my dream come true.
I feel like I just rolled my eyes so hard I saw my brain. But once again, George Lucas has an answer to all of this. During his Cannes Film Festival discussion, he said that he has long been accused of making his films too white. But people are missing the point. Most of the people in his films are aliens. Not to mention, Lucas's overall point here is that you're just meant to accept people for what they are, regardless of how they look.
It's all white men. I said, it's not. Most of the people there are aliens. And the idea is that you're supposed to accept people for what they are, even if they're big and furry, or whether they've got they're green and whatever. The idea is all of the people are equal. The only people that aren't, which was in there, are the robots. Well, you can't come in here. We don't like your kind here. So they were the only ones that were discriminated against, and that was a way of saying, you know, people always discriminate against something, and sooner or later, that's what's going to happen.
Hey, we don't serve their kind here.
What?
You're droids.
But that was a main part of that movie, was to make people realize that everybody is equal, no matter where they're from, no matter what they look like. That is the important thing, and it's all over. I mean, the whole movie is that way.
As an aside, and this is just my own personal observation, I find this such an interesting perspective because Lucas was seemingly never focused on representing absolutely every person ever, but wanted to showcase different people and species within the world that he created. Because the Star Wars universe is not like our own, so therefore the representation doesn't need to be exactly the same. And yeah, I mean, I guess I'd never really thought about that before, but I think that's interesting. Now, to this point, and this is actually something that I've discussed in a bunch of other videos, but I'm going to reiterate it here because I think it's still relevant. Many people, both in the creative field and in audiences, believe that it is imperative that they see themselves reflected back in the media that they consume. Whether that's gaming or shows or films or whatever, pick a medium, they want to see themselves in it. The obvious and giant problem with this is that these people can't arrest their concept of self long enough to enjoy something that isn't a perfect representation of who they are. And if they don't see themselves reflected back, they simply don't know how to relate. The sad thing is they also believe this about everyone else, that the rest of us can't enjoy something unless we see ourselves reflected in it. And at least in my opinion, it is truly one of the worst components of modern entertainment. I wonder if the furries feel particularly left out. Now, all of my yabbering has brought us to my final point and observation. Yes, we made it. Many cast members and creatives behind these new shows and films at Star Wars, particularly the Acolyte, because they've done a lot of talking, don't seem to understand the fundamental elements and themes that underpin Star Wars as a concept. Since the very beginning, George Lucas knew that he was telling a multi-generational story about people in space. He said as much in his early interviews, saying that this was a story of fathers and sons, that Star Wars is a family soap opera. And through his storytelling, he was able to weave in both age-old ideas and philosophies, but also allow for his personal political opinions to sometimes show up, one of the most important being his anti-authoritarian views. Beyond this, Lucas was very deliberate in how he presented good and bad, light and dark. He had a clear perception of morality, which is seemingly something Kathleen Kennedy and her gang of diversity drones either don't understand or don't know how to represent. The Acolyte showed us this fairly clearly. There is no real light and dark anymore. There's just ambiguity. The Sith are just as good as the Jedi. There is now this gray zone in goodness. And the confusion and ambiguity around this concept of light and dark was demonstrated yet again in another interview with the cast and Leslie Headland. Everyone was asked which side they would choose, light or dark. And I know some of you are gonna be like, Sydney, it's just fun, it's just a fun questioning conversation, but like, just hear me out here.
If you were in Star Wars, would you be on the light or the dark side?
Dark side.
Yeah, 100% dark side.
Well, actually, I'm a Gemini. I like to I would be both. I guess I'd be gray, you know?
Existing inside of either side, you know? It's like, I'm in the gray, for sure.
Yeah. I'm just naughty. You know, it would be like room red, and then I'd be like, just kidding, blue.
All the women, for some reason, gleefully said that they would join the dark side. For reasons like it would be more fun, it's cooler. They want to be in the gray Jedi code, whatever that is. These people discuss the light and dark side of the Force like they're picking a Harry Potter house. Again, I know they're being asked for the purposes of like, haha, hee hee, let's get to know them, but I think there are so many implications of saying that you would naturally err on the side of like selfishness and badness and destruction. Like, I don't think that these people at all understand what that means in the context of Star Wars. And this is something George Lucas was very clear about, explaining that the light side represents balance and harmony, and the dark side represents selfishness.
The core of the Force. I mean, you got the dark side, the light side. One is selfless, one is selfish. And you want to keep them in balance. What happens when you go to the dark side is it goes out of balance, and then you get really selfish and you forget about everybody, and you ultimately lead yourself, because when you get selfish, you get stuff, or you want stuff. And when you want stuff and you get stuff, then you are afraid somebody's going to take it away from you, whether it's a person or a thing or a particular pleasure, experience. Once you become afraid that somebody's going to take it away from you, or you're going to lose it, then you start to become angry, especially if you're losing it. And that anger leads to hate. And hate leads to suffering.
All of this speaks to Lucas's other comments at the Cannes Film Festival, where he said that nobody really understood the Force, and many of his important ideas fell by the wayside when Disney took over. From a storytelling perspective, plenty of people have argued that this moral ambiguity actually hurts the narrative. Villains are villains because what they do and what they believe is harmful and destructive. Good guys and the heroes don't always have to be shining pillars of righteousness and goodness, and they don't always have to do the right thing the first go round, but ultimately, the moral guidelines that are followed by heroes are something viewers can support and even emulate. With no good guys or bad guys, there's no real purpose to the story. It's just events happening in ways that don't actually make a lot of sense and have no real end goal. It's just and then storytelling. But this is sort of what most of us have come to expect from modern entertainment. And of course, and just to be clear, this isn't specific to Star Wars, when there is greater emphasis placed on diversity and inclusion and representation and having enough women and having enough gay people and representing everybody and anyone for whatever reason, even if it doesn't make any sense. Good storytelling and good writing typically, I think we've seen this enough, fall by the wayside. Or alternatively, absolutely everything gets hyper-politicized. Despite Lucas's very strong political opinions and ideologies and whatnot, his films just never felt all that political, and whatever messaging was there never felt super obvious, at least not to me. Because really, it didn't have to be. The story itself was compelling on its own and relatable on its own. And I think this, in part, is what makes Star Wars so enduring, despite the fact that it has its own failings and errors and holes, things that even George Lucas himself has discussed at length. Ultimately, as we are living through the time of constant remakes and sequels and reimaginings, it's inevitable that creatives are going to get things wrong. It's bound to happen. It's just the nature of the beast. However, it is a huge problem when these creatives and actors and actresses go out of their way to misunderstand the original vision and idea behind something that they are working on. That's even where a layman like me starts to take exception. In the end, and sadly, it really does seem like there's a group of people at Star Wars who are determined to change and deliberately stomp on George Lucas's original vision, taking down his empire brick by brick and pretending this is what he wanted all along. Now, on that very happy and pleasant note, and before I open the floor to all of you, this is just a reminder to check out Incogni using the link in the description. I honestly feel very strongly about you guys doing this, so go and check them out. Get your information off the bloody internet, get it away from these data brokers. I promise you it is worth the time and effort. Now, I open the floor to all of you. What do you all think? Are these actors and actresses deliberately misunderstanding George Lucas's original vision? Do you think that they are in fact trying to do something great and they just so happen to be stomping on his views and ideas as they're doing so? Do you think it's malicious? Do you think that it's innocent? What do you think of George Lucas's comments about his own creation, about his films and his characters and whatnot? Do you think that he wants that to be upheld? Do you think he's fine with it being changed? And what do you generally make of this whole issue overall? As always, if you have made it this far in the video, congratulations. This was a super long one. I always like having you along for the full ride, and I'm glad to have you here. If you are new here and you would like to see more of me and more of this kind of content, feel free to subscribe to the channel, as well as leaving this video a like and a comment, because it does help with the algorithm, but also I do read the majority of your comments and I like hearing your feedback. If you have a video suggestion, feel free to let me know. I do have a running master list of them, which I am trying to get to, and I will eventually get to them. But in the interim, as always, stay safe and well, my young potato children, and I will see you in the next video.